Hi there, it's Sewa, and welcome to another conversation with a boss woman who's creating their own unique blueprint for success. Today's conversation is with Fri Forjindam, who's the co-owner and chief development officer of Mycotoo. Mycotoo creates themed parks and immersive experiences, the likes of what you would see in HBO's Sweetwater that they recreated at South by Southwest, and then also Princess Paisley Park. So if you're wondering how someone who thought they were going to be a doctor and in fact was a biology major went on to now be a part of a startup that's creating these sorts of immersive experiences, keep watching. Fri Forjindam, welcome to She's Off Script. Thank you for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here.
Now, for any of our listeners who haven't heard of you, could you share who you are and what you do?
You know what? That's a great question because I'm just still trying to figure it out. Every day is a new invention. But so I work in themed entertainment and experience design. That is our craft or our industry. My company is called Mycotoo, short for My Company Too, based on a philosophy that we want our partners and our clients to feel just as part of our company as we are theirs. And what we do is we tell stories. We are storytellers at heart that, never quite grew up from the theater and somehow landed onto an industry that pays us to dream big and to build big and to make fun for other people so that they can have memories. So that's really the ecosystem of what I do in themed entertainment and experience design.
And I think I read that your mother was a successful entrepreneur and your father ran a successful business as well. What was it like growing up with them as role models?
Let me tell you, I still say to this day that my mom is my inspiration. She's the one who crafted me without even realizing it. So I'm originally from Cameroon. That's where I was born and raised. And my mom, back in the 80s, had the audacity to run a grocery store, which at the time was just avant-garde because it's a very patriarchal culture. Women weren't really encouraged to go into business for themselves. And so for her to start a retail and grocery chain from our guest room where she would just sort of resell things that she would collect from her travels. And then it eventually grew into this grocery store chain called Mycotoo. And those initials were for the names of people in my family. And we essentially sold European and American products in West Africa. And let me tell you, the schooling that I got from helping her shelve things and put actual stickers on products, because at the time there was no scanning, you had to manually punch your price stickers on things. And counting the money at the end of the day and just customer service and guest experience. I didn't realize then that all of that was informing how I viewed the world. And my father, completely different sort of expertise. My mom was an entrepreneur. She was always, like we say, buy 'em, sell 'em. It's a phrase, which is whatever you buy, you can sell it. She's always trying to hustle for some new venture, right? She's an entrepreneur. But my dad was very straight-laced, very, cause and effect. He was an engineer by training, and he went on to lead one of the bigger engineering companies in the region that built and repaired rigs and oil rigs. So different, but I watched both of them grow their companies and sort of support each other and be parallel to each other in their ventures, which again was so not the norm, in West African culture, at least in the 80s, to have a husband and wife duo doing their thing, but still supporting each other and not having to sacrifice for each other, which I guess informs how I see the world now.
Exactly. Now, given that you grew up with that backdrop of entrepreneurship and business, why did you feel like you had to go to medical school? Why did you feel like that was the path you were supposed to take?
You've done your research. Look at you.
I try.
Snap. It's funny that you phrase it that way. I didn't feel like I had to go to medical school. I felt like I had no choice but to go to medical school. It wasn't even a feeling as it was just, this is the way to go. I don't know how many of your listeners are immigrants or relate to sort of the immigrant upbringing, but you do as you're told. And if you have the opportunity to be educated in England or the US, which is considered a jackpot, you better come back with some legitimate certificates like doctor, engineer, lawyer, something that won't embarrass the family, right?
Right.
So, I loved science. I still do. I still try to dig deep and question and try to figure out the cause of things, the real root of things, which I guess innately is scientific, is a scientist sort of approach. So pursuing medicine didn't feel too much of a stretch. It actually felt like the safe route for me. And it wasn't until third year in undergrad where I was like at a table in the library, and all of my friends and fellow students were basically studying for the MCATs. And I hadn't even given it a second thought. I was too busy learning lines for the play that was coming up. And I looked left and I looked right and I was like, wait, you guys are studying for MCATs. Like, when are the MCATs? And they're like, oh, 3
You're
months.
like, how did I get here? I don't even know when the MCATs are.
It hadn't even crossed my mind to like look into the MCATs, register, let alone study. And that's when I knew, oh yeah, this is not for me. Like, so by that point, I'd already gone far down my prereqs. So I finished as a biology major because I was like, I'm not going to start over.
No.
But I walked for graduation, I actually walked the stage of the drama department to get my faux placeholder diploma because, I wasn't really a part of that department. And that's kind of where it evolved from there. But, it wasn't really a choice. It was just like, this is what you're doing. But thank God I was more of the defiant type.
But what first drew you to theater?
Yeah. I've been asked this a couple of times, and I feel like I didn't know. I think I've always been drawn to the theater mindset. I just didn't know the words for it. And so, the way I think about it is like, it wasn't like all of a sudden I stumbled onto Broadway and saw the marquee and lights and I was like, that's it. Like it wasn't that obvious for me. It's more about connecting the dots with things that I was always into as a kid. All the way back in Cameroon, when I was a kid, I loved stories. I loved watching movies. I would lose myself. Every time my parents traveled to the US, they would come back with recordings of TV shows on VHS because that's what we did. And I would just lose myself in some of these shows. And Disney came into the scene, and my mom would bring home, the box set of Aladdin. It was the VHS box set, and then like behind the scenes booklet. And I remember just losing myself in the booklet, learning about how they drew all the scenes, and I loved it. And I would love, stealing my parents' camcorder and forcing my siblings to record us, doing stupid stuff. Like, force my sister to dress up, in makeup and cosplay, essentially, is what they call it now. We would just do all these silly things. And I never quite shook it. And I just didn't realize that there was a term for it or a career path. It wasn't really until I came to the US that I realized, oh, people are doing this for fun and for work and for like as a career. And it was, I slowly had to convince my parents that maybe medicine wasn't the way to go, and this weird kooky world called theater was what I was going to pursue.
So how did you finally make that stand when you say you had to convince them? I know you then kind of quietly applied for Columbia's MFA program. So how did you finally come out to them, so to speak?
I did, right? It really was a coming out party. The first coming out attempt was a bust. It really was a shutdown. It was an undergrad. I went to University of Virginia. And I remember being at odds. I was at this crossroads, like I was saying, trying to pursue medicine and theater, and I wasn't sure. And I started questioning myself. I started second guessing whether this was even a career path. So I remember going online and taking some test to evaluate if you're creative or not. I don't even remember what it was called, but it was one of those like assessment tests, that like if you filled it out afterwards, it would create some sort of algorithm to say to describe how your brain works. And lo and behold, that test was like, yep, you are creative through and through. Like the way your mind thinks, it's very abstract, it's very right brained, and so that to me was like the ticket. I was like, that's it. I have my printed test results. I'm going to take it to my parents and tell them that I'm a creative and I can't pursue medicine. And I did, and it failed. It failed.
Ooh.
They were just like, no, we are paying for your tuition. You are going to pursue this. And to be fair, they were concerned. They didn't want me to, not have a source of income and to be struggling. So now as a parent, I completely understand what their hesitation was, but it was an immediate shutdown. And my retaliation was basically to just say, you know what, I'm going to go to whatever school and I don't care. And actually, no, sorry, this conversation happened in high school. Now that I think about it, this exchange happened in high school. And so as a retaliation in my own way, still a good daughter, good immigrant student, I basically just like applied to whatever I knew were the top schools at the time. And the top public school at the time was UVA, as well as University of Michigan. And it was basically my way of saying, F you, I'm going to just go to whatever school, I don't care.
Right.
And so got into UVA, pursued that, but it never quite left me. That feeling of like, I want to go to New York, I want to try this out, never quite left. So, of course, I still found my way into the theater department at University of Virginia and started realizing that this is where I was coming alive, and this is where I felt strong and untouchable. And it wasn't until when I was towards the end of when I was graduating that by accident I applied for a visa. So for the listeners that are tuning in, there's this whole world. If you're an immigrant and you come in as a student, you're an F1 visa. Basically, if you can't show proof that you are a student, you are out. And this was pre-current administration, right? Where you were still nervous about being deported or whatever, but I can't even imagine what it's like now. So that F1 visa that sort of established my status or justified my status was key. And that was the other reason why they were worried about me pursuing theater, because they were like, how are you going to be in the US legally?
Right. What jobs are you going to get? Because the
No
employer sponsors you for your visa.
Exactly. No one is going to hire an actress. Sorry. Like, if you're an illegal, that's going to be a huge deal breaker, at least in their eyes. And so I applied for the lottery, the DV lottery program, which at the time, and I'm sure it still happens. I actually don't know how robust it is anymore, but every year, 50,000 applicants out of the millions of people who would apply from all over the world would get selected. And I got selected. I won the lottery. And I'll never forget, it was actually, the way it came wasn't even via email. It was through a letter that I almost didn't get because it was buried in junk mail somewhere. And long story short, found the letter. I was literally just crying with excitement. My mom happened to be there because she was helping me go through the mail at the time. And the first things out of her mouth, I'll never forget, just like, now you can pursue your dream. I'll never forget.
Oh, what a story.
I mean, she was like, now you can go for it, right? So I think secretly she knew what this meant. And I think it was also an extension of her. But now it meant I could go for it. And I'd already applied to Columbia because I was just like, whatever, we'll see what happens. And fortunately I got in, and now I could be here and pursue it and not have to worry about, being deported. So it was just this whole serendipitous thing coming together. It wasn't even so much me realizing as it was all these extra things that I couldn't control had to happen for me to actually be able to pursue it. So I went to New York.
Wow. So how do we make the leap from being in New York, attempting to be an actress, to now being in LA?
That was a trip. So New York was such a great training ground for me. First of all, it's New York. Like, not everyone is made or wired for that city, but if you do love it and you thrive in it, there's something in you that you learn and take from that city that just never leaves. And you take that spirit wherever you go. And New York is diverse, it moves, it's not stagnant. And I was lucky and fortunate because I didn't get just thrown into it. I still had the uptown silos, Columbia's, uptown, Upper West Side. And it's a beautiful historic campus that's kind of isolated. So you can get the best of both worlds, where you're isolated in your academic space, but you can also leave, get on the train, hop on the one or whatever, and get to wherever you need to be for that creative, challenge. And because it was grad school, we were focused. It was a small class of 16 of us, I believe. And
Wow.
no, actually 12. Gosh, I can't even remember. But anyway, it was a small class each year. And we just were with each other night and day. We ate, breathed, slept, theater. And the training that we got was, in hindsight, what I needed, because it wasn't conventional theater training. It was very different. It was very experimental. And at the time, it wasn't commercial. So it didn't set you up for success. The training was about the craft. It was about the physicality, but it wasn't something that you could come out and be like, okay, now I'm able to play this part. Because when you came out of grad school, they were like, okay, but you're homegirl number 5 and you need to play the person selling McDonald's burgers or whatever, right?
Did you know that going into the program?
No, we went in, or at least I went in ready to learn. I was a sponge. And through the program, I felt empowered. I felt like I could do anything. I could play anything. And I did at school. And, as part of our training, we were able to push and stretch our muscles and play roles that were super challenging and not conventional. And then when we came out, it was a huge reality hit, because it wasn't that we weren't able to play these parts. It was that our minds weren't prepared to reduce ourselves to whatever parts were available. And
got to start from the bottom, right?
Got to start from the bottom, but not just the bottom with parts that you're just like, really? This is what most actors have to experience. So this wasn't unique to us, but man, did it feel like a blow, to have gone through 3 years and then to come out feeling sort of disillusioned by the industry. And so I stayed in New York for a year after that, and I was starting to book work, and I had an agent and all that, but I got tired of the snow. I got tired of people not picking up after their dogs. And I was like, that's it. I'm done. I'm leaving New York. I'm going to go to the only other place where I can still pursue this, but my soul won't die or freeze over in the winter. And so California seemed like the natural fit. Definitely not Chicago. Shout out to your Chicago listeners, but.
Ooh, no. The snow, I could barely do it. I went to school in Colorado. My family lives in Colorado, and I love to visit, but man, I remember scraping and digging myself out of snow. Can't do it.
Especially if you're a tropical girl, like you're born on the equator, this is not for you.
I love me some sun.
I need some sunshine, I need some vitamin D, I need like sweat and humidity and all that good stuff. So.
All of it. So now you're in LA. A couple years after you joined Mycotoo, or it launched, you guys landed your first contract to design 2 theme parks in Dubai. To me, that sounds like a huge contract for a startup. So how did you guys gain enough industry trust and credibility to land such an amazing contract in a relatively short amount of time?
That's a really great question. And I think about that a lot. And I think a lot of it had to do with, even though technically we were a startup, so the company was founded in 2011. In the summer of 2011, I joined January of 2012. So I was like, it had 2 founders, Cliff Warner and David Wally. And then I was employee, I guess, number 1, in January of 2012. And even though we were a startup, our history, our relationship goes way beyond that. And so that's why I always talk to people and say, you even don't judge your business or your venture on where you are on day 1. Judge your venture on the experience that you bring to day 1 and position yourself for 5 years ahead. So you have to react to the present, but you can't be disillusioned or discouraged by the present sometimes. And so the 2 founders, David Wally and Cliff Warner, go way back. They've known each other for 30 years. They went to school together. And then when Cliff Warner started a company prior, it was another theme park design company. That's actually one of the first sort of office jobs that I landed when I moved out to LA. So I was done doing the waitressing thing to make ends meet. And I was like, let me at least pursue something that's going to make me feel motivated. And so his company was my first job. And, I was there for a little bit. I was expecting my first baby, and then decided to go on maternity leave and didn't come back, because I knew that if I came back, I wouldn't be able to move farther, just because of some of the things that I'd gotten to do in my growth. I knew that if I came back, I wouldn't be able to come back. I wouldn't be able to pursue it. And context, This was in 2008, right? So the recession had hit and everyone was super cautious. And so here I am, pregnant, being offered my job back legally because, it's maternity leave. And I was like, no, I'm going to walk from this, because prior to maternity leave, I'd gotten a taste of some of the creative direction roles. And I knew that with everyone being super cautious, coming back at this role, I would come back to just being an admin, an executive assistant, and I didn't want that. So I took the gamble and said, nope, I'm going to stay home or find something else, which was crazy at the time. Fortunately, Cliff Warner and I stayed in touch, and we just had a really good rapport. And so when he started Mycotoo, it was an immediate jump on. So I say that to say that even though we were a startup, our relationship, our rapport, and the experience and expertise that they brought, definitely more than I did at the time, went back many, many, many years. So it was more of a revving of the engine as opposed to a cold startup.
Got it. So they had the expertise, they had the industry contacts, people knew who they were. So it wasn't a stretch for them to be trusted with such a huge project.
No, it was a stretch. I mean, we were in the garage.
Well, to that point, I know when you guys landed the deal, you were 3 people working out of a garage, and somehow you had to ramp up to a team of 160 plus people who ultimately built the parks. So what was that ramp up like? Because I'm sure as a startup, you always say yes and then figure it out later. How did you guys figure that out?
Yes, and like, that's also the theater mentality, right? Like, yes, and let me get the answer for you. So yeah, it was 3 of us in the garage, actually 4, because we were bringing in, we had brought in a 4th employee by the time we got this job. So the call came in after we had done a small scope of work that was just to help them cost it out. And really, in full transparency, at this point, my role is to help support. Like, I'm not even driving a lot of the decisions at this point. The call came in saying, okay, great. We love the estimation that you guys put together to help them understand what it would take to actually build a theme park. And then they were like, can you do it? Can you now build it?
Wow.
And we said, yes. Hung up. And that scene, I'm not even sure what movie it was, but it's like, we're going to need a bigger boat. Is it from Jaws? I'm not even sure if it's from Jaws, but like, it was that realization of like, okay, this garage isn't going to work. We're going to need to hire people like toot sweet. So everyone starts calling, who do you know? Who did you work with on such? And mind you, at this point as well, we had a non-compete. Our founder, one of our founders, because he had left his position at the previous company, he had a non-compete. So there were a lot of people that we would typically go to hire. Got it. Which turned out to be a blessing in disguise, because that forced us to think outside the box and to not hire people based on their resume, but to hire people based on their skill set, on their propensity to learn, on the relationship that we had with them, and just take a gamble and say, okay, you're good at this completely other thing, but the tools that are needed for project management in this other industry, we can still translate into our industry. And so by pairing people who are seasoned with young, fresh, new talent, we were able to staff up to 160 designers, architects, engineers, draftsmen, costumers, composers, all those different entities that are needed to design and develop 2 full theme parks at the same time.
How long did that take you guys?
From the time we got the call to when we were at our peak, it took 8 months, and we ramped up to 160 team members. Meanwhile, in this whole time, we had to obviously leave from the garage into the house because the garage got too small. So we moved into the house where the kitchen was an office, the living room was an office, the hallway into his bedroom was an office. And then finally, when the refrigerator quit because there were too many people opening and closing, I think at this time, like 30 people, we were like, no, screw it. We need to get a space. So we found a production facility not too far off that became our HQ. And that's where we moved in. And literally, as we're having meetings, they're like putting drywall on office rooms. Like that's the craziness that it was.
That's like the depiction of you build it as you are flying, right?
Yeah. No, you are jumping off of the cliff and you're figuring out the parachute as you're free falling. The good news is that you trust the people that you're falling with, so you know you're not going to die. You just know you need to act quick, trust and, be willing to adapt and adjust quickly.
But having to ramp up so quickly, was funding an issue, or given kind of the industry background, maybe the funding was already available for you?
That's a fantastic question. And, people wonder about that a lot too, especially with startups. You have to be very protective of your resources and your team. Your team, the people who work on your team or for you or with you, that's your engine. That's the brand. That's the culture that makes for a great product, a great service, a great deliverable. And you got to take care of them. You have to make them priority over the project, which means as we were setting up the scope of work as well as our contract, and that's just kind of who we are as a company anyway. You have a startup payment, a mobilization payment that at least covers a certain amount of that onboarding process, so that you're not fronting the project for the client. And it's hard
That's
because
no.
and it's hard, right? It's so tempting because when you're a startup, you're excited to get the work. You want to have that nice client logo on your portfolio, so you'll kind of do anything. And you have to remember not to forget who you are, and not to forget that you're also bringing something to the table. So you have to be covered to a certain extent. And I think a lot of it is also trust. Doing your research and knowing what company you're starting to work with. If it's a new company, do your research. And if it's a company or a team that you already have a relationship, there might be a little bit of flexibility in terms of how much that mobilization, amount or payment is. But you have to value what you bring to the table as a leader in whatever industry you're in, and not sell that away, or not give it away for free,
No, that's a good point. You have something to offer as well, and don't let people walk all over you because you think,
I'm a startup, I'm just happy to get the work. Like, no.
Exactly.
Oh, someone was actually talking about this the other day, where they were like, there's a difference between, he was giving an analogy about, coffee shops, saying you can decide to start a coffee shop and sell the best coffee, and so does the next coffee shop owner right next to you. And if the measure of success is just based on how many coffee cups you can pour and how many orders you can take, eventually you're going to have a customer who's going to say, no, this is crap, and I'm going to go next door. As opposed to positioning your coffee shop as a service, as a source of expertise, as a strategic partner to elevate that customer's experience, right? Then all of a sudden, they're not just buying coffee, they're buying a relationship, they're buying a brand, they're buying a lifestyle and association, which makes it a lot harder for them to go to someone else. And that just means trusting and fighting for who you are as a company and as an entrepreneur or as a startup. It doesn't mean you have to be so established.
So true. Now, for any of our listeners right now who are still like, I don't really get what it is you do, Fri.
So again, what is this?
Yeah, what exactly is this? And so I feel like maybe this example might galvanize that for us. And I think HBO's Westworld may be one of the more recognizable projects that you guys have had. Could you walk us through what your role was on that project and what it took to bring it to life?
Thank you for asking. So the short of what we do is we design and develop guest experiences of different scales. Because we're storytellers and we all come from the theater, we are fortunate because we get to build and tell stories in real space. So unlike going to a movie theater where you're watching a story and it's a little bit more of a passive experience, or going to a theater show where there's maybe some level of interaction, we're building the world around you. It's an immersive world where you come in and you get to explore and play, be moved, be inspired, be educated. And so my official role at the company is as Chief Development Officer. I lead biz dev, communications and branding, but I still get to do creative direction or executive creative direction on a few key projects. Because, the theater will never go away. Like, I still need to get that fixed. And so HBO's Westworld was a great example of how these different art forms can come together. Mycotoo was approached by a marketing agency called Giant Spoon here in Los Angeles. And we had already had previous relationships with them on working on other activations, but they approached us because they already had the relationship with HBO on board to produce a marketing experience for them for South by Southwest, which is, as your listeners may know, is a pretty high profile conference that happens in Austin, Texas every year, or at least it did. It'll come back next year, knock on wood. And so our task was, they had already sold the idea of building Sweetwater, which is the fictional town that Westworld is based on, at least the first two seasons, sorry. So they had sold them the idea of building Sweetwater, and then they came to us and they're like, okay, we need help in doing that. And it really was an awesome marriage, because Giant Spoon is fantastic marketing agency. They understand the digital influencer sort of communication and how to roll that out. We came in to make the world come to life. So there was a certain a piece of land on the outskirts of Austin that was essentially this shanty town, Western town, legitimately shanty town, Western town, that we came in and in collaboration with Giant Spoon, rebuilt Sweetwater, and then Mycotoo specifically, we wrote the script that all the actors and brand ambassadors would use to inhabit the space. We created all the different interactives that you could do. So if a guest came in, you were shuttled in on a bus, you had no idea where you were headed, and then you landed into this amazing Western town in the middle of nowhere. There were 90 performers, all characters that would interact with you. You could have followed one character on their journey for 8 hours, or you could have followed multiple. You could have been there for an hour, you could have been there for 10 hours, and people were. And there was just so much to do. If you arrived, there was a post office, there was a salon, there was an actual barbershop where you could get an old school shave. There were hidden gems where you could discover things, and then it would unlock portals into some of the spaces that were identified with the show. And this was all in anticipation of season 2, which was coming out at the time. And it blew up. This is stuff that we love. We love to play. We love performance. We love theatrical experiences. We had no idea the reception that it was going to have. So it was a 3-day event for South by. And in that 3 days, I think there was a limited invited guest only of 1,500 people. And that those 1,500 people were able to spread the word. And we got 1.9 billion online impressions just from that 3-day event. And it was when we came back to the office, we were like, wait, is this for our thing or is this for something else? Because what? But it was just a lot of fun, because you're building a world. You're taking off the fourth wall of theater. You're getting rid of the proscenium, and you are inviting people to be immersed in that world and to interact with characters and to just go on their own journey. And, if you're smart, make money off of it, So that's what we get to do. And HBO's South by Southwest World was a great example of that marriage of theme park design, theatrical, development, experience design, live event, spectacle, gameplay, with marketing chops. All of those things coming together it was such a memorable experience, and one that I'll never forget.
My role, incredible.
Yeah, my role was just to be able to talk about it. I have a fantastic team. David Wally, who's my business partner, was the creative director on that, and we had an amazing team underneath him with Bonnie Holman and a bunch of other people. And, so in that particular project, I just got to show up and be a guest, but to talk about it afterwards was amazing. Other projects that I get to work on more specifically, like what we did with Princess Paisley Park. But ultimately, we're all hands on deck. We come in as needed, and we get to shepherd it to opening day.
Wow. I have to say, your company's growth sounds really seamless. Was it?
No. Why would you think that? Don't be misleading your guest.
Let us know. Give us a little bit of insight. What were your challenges?
Were and are. It's always, I think, ultimately, we are an entertainment development company, and where we ultimately are headed and where we've started pivoting more towards is ownership of our brands and being able to not only design and develop these experiences, but operate them and own them and essentially license them out to others.
Interesting.
So we've been very successful in developing it for other people. So in that capacity, you're a design consultant. You are bringing in the service to conceive the idea, come up with a strategic plan, develop it, produce it, run it for them, and then hand them the keys and say, Godspeed, right? And that's great. But what that means is that there's a cycle of trying to chase work, which is awesome, but you're not chasing work in a vacuum. You're chasing work in a very competitive environment, which is fine, but also with things that are completely out of your control, such as you have a client that it's moving forward with and everything is ready to go, and then COVID happens, and then all of a sudden no work, right?
Yeah.
Or they completely change their direction because there's been an internal restructuring, and so now everything that's been developed in terms of relationship up until this point now needs to be reset. And so that, there's a shelf life too on at least from a new business standpoint, on when conversations start to when they actually turn on, which means you're having to reset again and again. And it's doable. It's nothing unique to us, but man, it's exhausting. And our industry is very project based. It's kind of similar to the film industry, where your teams are staffed based on the needs of the project. At least for us, we're pretty smart about keeping our overhead efficient and not having too many people on payroll unless we really need to, or unless the project could sustain it. And our industry, our freelancers, our designers, they're used to that mindset. They're also always chasing. So what that means is that there's a rinse and repeat in terms of staffing up that happens constantly. And ultimately where you want to be is, ownership. You want to be able to stand by the concepts and the experiences that you're putting out in the market, and also make money while you sleep. And so that's always been our goal as a company. And fortunately, we've been making a lot of headway in pivoting into that direction, so that it's not always about services that we're providing, but services that we're providing towards our work that we can eventually have royalties and licensing fees from.
So would you say once you accomplished that, you would have made it, the proverbial made it as a company?
As a company, yeah. As a company, for sure. It's something that, Mycotoo is our sort of tagline is the entertainment development company. Development, not entertainment design, not entertainment consulting, not entertainment dabble, So development is really putting on the real estate hat in a way, which is, how do you take a dirt piece of land and turn it into a master planned oasis, right?
Wow.
That isn't just about architecture and building homes. It's about vision. It's about seeing what the possibilities are with this piece of land, starting to lay in the partners that could come in to elevate it. It's about community building. It's about long-term planning and investment. And in a weird way, that's not too far from entertainment, where entertainment isn't anymore just something that you bring into as a last minute thought. It's something that is now, at least in the smart developments, it's an anchor to a lot of these master planned communities. And it could be a fountain, it could be a shopping center, it could be a museum and experience, it could be a district or a corridor, but it's integral to how lifestyles and culture is created. And so you have to almost think of it as a developer. And developers about having long-term revenue coming in. They are just about building the land and then selling it off. They are like, no, we will have a long-term we'll be long-term stakeholders in this. And I think that's the mindset that we take at Mycotoo, at least.
But I do have to ask, I guess, a little bit about the elephant in the world right now. I would say for the first time in I don't know how many years, Disneyland closed. And so what was going on behind your closed doors when COVID first hit and some of your projects were being impacted?
Yeah. It was a scary time, and it is still kind of scary just because there's still so many unknowns. But the first couple of weeks in March, when all the shutdowns started happening, if you recall, there was so much uncertainty and triggered reactions to things. We were really smart in shutting down pretty quickly and pivoting to remote work environment. And that was a lot easier for us to do compared to a lot of our other colleagues or other companies in our industry, because we're already a nimble, small team. So the ability to work from home and to take your equipment and communicate from home, didn't require too much of a change in process. But it did require us to make sure that we put systems in place pretty early on in terms of communication and dialogue. But man, I'll tell you, watching the dominoes fall in in our industry has been scary, because these are livelihoods that are being lost. These are our friends and our colleagues and our friendly competitors that are losing their source of income. And it's not to say that we were removed from that as well. I mean, we were set up to do some really fun things at some of these major, events, like at South by and at Comic-Con. But I think where we were able to adapt, and which is kind of the mindset that I like to adopt even for my personal life, was, making sure that we didn't have all our eggs in one basket. And you'll find that a lot of the companies, not just in our industry, but just in general, that are getting hardest hit are the ones that have been very successful, but with a very specific vertical. And man, you have to be flexible. You got to have different spokes happening,
Diversify your risk.
The cogs, yeah, you got to have multiple cogs, because if it's just one awesome thing, all it takes is one, tragedy, and it comes to a grinding halt. So we design theme parks, but that's not all we do. We do visitor centers. We develop master plan communities. We work with architects, with municipalities, with brands, and so that has allowed us to be able to have a little bit more buoyancy in reaction, rather than being so hard hit that we couldn't move forward. And I think also because we're theater people at heart, man, if you're a theater person, you know that show must go on mentality to your core, right? So you're not just the actress, you're the stage manager, you're the house manager, you're taking tickets, you're mopping the stage. So that mentality of being able to do multiple things or readjust, so that you're not just now Fri Forjindam, Chief Development Officer. No, now you're going to have to write that treatment. Now you're going to have to be the creative director on this project and be hands-on. You have to put your ego aside and say, what's the good of the company, and how do we adapt our skills and brush up on things that we haven't done in a long time, so that we can be efficient in our costs and in our overhead, but also still be able to react to new business or new clients or new opportunities, and not feel like, oh crap, we can't do that anymore because we don't have that one person who knew how to fix the light. You got to be able to learn fast. It's coming back to the garage days. Yeah. We're not in the garage. That's I feel fortunate and blessed, but man, I never forget those days. I just don't, because you never know, and you still need to be able to be flexible and nimble and put your ego aside, because you just never know.
Yeah. And even today, I would say new opportunities and new industries are being born out of this year. So you need to be adaptable, and you need to be able to capture the opportunity fairly quickly before the market starts to get saturated.
Oh yeah. I mean, we talked about this, prior to this conversation, where, I actually see the landscape right now as the crazy opportunity. And it may not feel that way, but let me tell you, there's so much opportunity right now, because the playing field has been leveled. No one has an advantage on how we're going to move forward, on what miracle product, except for the vaccine, hopefully, on what miracle product is going to change everything for everyone. No one. All the previous models are, have this new cell line in there that is essentially COVID. And how do you adapt, and what's the future of your business? So because the playing field has been equalized, I strongly feel that anything goes in terms of problem solving. So if you have an idea that you've always thought, wouldn't it be great if, why not now? I mean, when else but now? And the only difference is, it's really, for me, a mindset thing. The factors that would have hindered you before COVID still exist today. So COVID is just one more rung on that ladder, but it's not the rung that all of a sudden makes it impossible to pursue anything.
Exactly.
It is the rung, though, that makes a lot of other people nervous about trying that new thing. So why not you? You know what I mean?
It definitely opens the playing field. That's for sure.
Oh yeah.
Now, What parting advice would you have for any of the budding entrepreneurs listening who are looking to go off script and maybe start something that others may not understand?
Ooh, embrace being an underdog. Embrace the gift of being underestimated, because when you're underestimated, no one's paying attention to you, which means you can go about your business.
Mm,
You can work without naysayers. You can pursue and try things and go off the beaten path. And when you're going off the beaten path, there's less likely of a blueprint. And so you can break the rules a little bit and fail fast, but still try it. And you'll
mhm.
never know what you'll stumble on. So there's actually an advantage to being underestimated and being unknown, and surround yourself with people who aren't going to be dream crushers. It's really easy for people to impart wisdom based on how they see themselves, what their capacity is, and also what their successes have been. So really
Yeah.
be discerning and protective about the people you let into your dreams, and protect it, like fight for it, protect it, and embrace that it is a hidden secret, and just bury down and do the work.
Ooh, that's such great advice. Fri, this has been an amazing conversation. So for anyone listening that wants to follow the journey, yours personally and also from Mycotoo, where can we find you?
Oh, thank you for asking. Look at me about to do a plug.
Of course,
Um,
go for it.
you can, officially, you visit our website, mycotoo.com. It's a great starting point to get a sense of who we are as a company, and at the very least, our industry. And, hit me up on Instagram at Fri Forjindam. You will find me. I'm always, always, always excited and thrilled to answer questions about our industry specifically. I feel a little bit like an ambassador, just because there's so many people who are new to it, but there's so much opportunity for growth. The themed entertainment industry is writers, designers, artists, architects, engineers, musicians. It really is this intersection of all these different disciplines. So you'd be project managers. So you'd be surprised at how welcoming and inclusive it is in terms of opportunity. So I'm happy to chat with anyone, DM me, but you can find me on Instagram at Fri Forjindam, or you can visit our website and to get a little bit more information on our company and definitely on our industry.
Perfect. She offered. So you guys definitely take her up on that offer.
I know, and it's a ballsy offer, but listen, you won't know until you know. So just ask the question. At the very least, I'll get back to you as soon as I can, but I'll do my best to be honest. And at the very least, though, thank you for having me on and for talking about this, because I think your platform is amazing. And
Thank you.
I'm hoping that as people are listening to you and watching you grow, that they can say, I knew her when, because, she's off script isn't about being off script. It's about charging or forging your own path and creating your own blueprint.
Exactly.
And it's scary, but man, you will never regret it.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Fri.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
If you enjoyed this conversation with Fri, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next one. If you're listening to the audio version of this She's Off Script podcast, don't forget to subscribe wherever you're listening. Also, if you're ready to build your own business, join Boss Off Script, which is our business building community. Every month, you're going to get resources, live coaching, virtual co-working opportunities that will help you build your business. Check out the link in the description box below. All right, we'll see you here for our next conversation.